Good evening, everybody. I am Bryan Schott. I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch, utahpolitics.news, and glad to have you aboard this evening. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. There is so much going on. So much has happened in the last week since we talked last Tuesday. Just a ton of stuff. We've got Trevor Lee embroiled in a bunch of scandal, and then he loses at the Davis County Convention. He did get enough support to be in the primary, but his delegates are supposed to be his people. And he ended up losing that election to Bob Stevenson on Saturday. I was there. That was an interesting afternoon. We've got one primary qualifier in Utah's 3rd Congressional District. Celeste Maloy got enough signatures today to qualify for the primary election, taking a stress off of her ahead of this weekend's Republican State Convention down at Utah Valley University. Now the pressure is on Phil Lyman, who still has not qualified via signatures, and he'll need to get 40% at convention next week in order to make it into the primary. I think he's going to do it, but even if he does, he's going to be at a massive cash disadvantage in that election. We're probably going to have at least a 4-way primary in the 1st Congressional District in the Democratic race, maybe a 5-way primary, potentially a 6-way primary. Although I think it's either going to be a 4 or 5-way primary, which I don't even know how to handicap that. Who knows what's going to happen there? And speaking of the 1st Congressional District, we had a blow up with Nate Blouin's campaign, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to talk about this discourse that's going around the revelation of Nate Blouin's old online posts where he said some pretty offensive things. Yeah, they were a decade and a half ago, but he still said them. And there's a lot of discourse that, well, this is just a hit job by the McAdams campaign. It's opposition research. So he said them. He said those things. He's not denying that's a deflection. And we'll talk about that as well. The Utah legislature, again, attacking the judiciary. They're going after Supreme Court Justice Diana Hagen. And we'll talk about that as well. If you're just tuning in, it looks like the redistricting ballot measure in Virginia has passed. That means that they're going to redraw the maps ahead of the 2026 election in Virginia, their congressional maps. And that could take the state from a, what is it right now, a 6-5 Democratic advantage. It's going to add 4 more potentially actually solidly Democratic seats to the map. And so you could be going from a 6-5 split in Congress to a 10-1 Democratic advantage, or Democrats picking up 4 more seats. And you can expect that Donald Trump is going to start melting down on social media about it any minute, because I mean, it was a very close election, but it does look like that has passed. We can do a preview of what's coming up on the at the state convention, the state GOP convention and the Democratic convention, which is going to be on Saturday. I am hoping to be at the Republican state convention unless they deny me a press pass, which is completely possible. They gave me one last year, but they might not give me one this year. I do want to talk about this first. You can probably see it on my t-shirt. I was down in Phoenix last week. Thursday night, I went to the Mortgage Matchup Arena where the Phoenix Suns play. My son lives down in Phoenix. Went down there and went to the Bruce Springsteen show. It was my son's very first Springsteen show. I've seen him probably 12, 13, 14 times. But I can say that this was probably one of the best Springsteen shows I've ever seen. Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine was on stage with him for about half of the show, and he was tremendous. And like I said, they completely killed it on my favorite Springsteen song, Ghost of Tom Joad. But I wanted to share this with you. I did record how the show opened, and I'm going to play this for you in just a second. It's about a minute long. I do have to apologize for the video, though. I was in the upper bowl, and there were people walking in front of me as I was trying to record it, so I tried to edit that out as much as possible or get around that as much as possible. The amazing thing about this show is the doors opened at 6 o'clock, and Springsteen was supposed to hit the stage at 7:30. Springsteen hit the stage at 7:29. I've never been to a concert like that where the artist was on time or early, but he hit the stage at 7:29. So I'm going to play this for you real quick. It's about a minute long. This is how they open the show, and if you don't get pumped watching this, you do not have a heartbeat. So here we go.
We are here in celebration and defense of our American ideals, democracy, our Constitution, and our sacred American promise. The America that I love, the America that I've written about for 50 years, has been a beacon of hope and liberty all around the world, is currently in the hands of a corrupt, incompetent, racist, reckless, and treasonous administration. Tonight, we ask all of you to join with us in choosing hope over fear, democracy over authoritarianism, the rule of law over lawlessness, ethics over unbridled corruption, resistance over complacency, truth over lies, unity over division, and peace over war.
So that's how they opened the show. And we were off. It was 3 hours of, it was a revival meeting. It was incredible. And I know that it was attacking the current administration. Bruce Springsteen has made no bones about that, but it was an incredible show. I'm so happy I got a chance to go, and it was just great. I'm really thankful I got a chance to go to that. I was texting my wife during the show and after the show, and it was just, if you've ever heard the phrase collective effervescence, that's what this was. There were moments when I was looking around and the entire arena was jumping or waving their arms. Springsteen had us in the palm of his hand, and he was playing us like a fiddle, and he knew what he was doing, but it was collective effervescence. It was so good to just be in a place where we had hope. I mean, it was hope and joy that I personally really haven't felt in a long time. And I kept texting my wife. I kept saying, I needed that. And I did. So anyway, that was the beginning of Bruce Springsteen's show down in Phoenix. So now we've done that, let us talk about what is happening in Utah politics. And so I want to hear from you, and leave your questions in the chat. I will get to them as soon as possible. But let us start with the congressional races, because that's the news that happened today. Celeste Maloy, who was running in the 3rd congressional district, but is now was running in the 2nd congressional district, but is now running in the 3rd congressional district. She qualified for the ballot on through the signature path today. She officially crossed the 7,000 signature threshold that she needed to in order to qualify for the ballot in June, the June primary. Phil Lyman only has about 1,400, almost 1,500 verified signatures, leaving him about 5,500 short. The last day that they can verify is Friday, because the convention is coming up on Saturday. I don't know if he's going to get there, but I do expect him to get at least 40% at the convention, if not win the nomination outright. If he does get into the primary against Maloy, he's going to be at a massive cash disadvantage. The latest FEC filings show that Maloy has more than $460,000 on hand. Lyman has raised less than $5,000 so far, so he really didn't have to report anything. So she is going to have a massive cash advantage, and she's going to need that because it is almost a brand new district. As I reported a couple of weeks ago, a very large portion of that district has never seen her name on the ballot, even though she is an incumbent member of Congress. So we can talk about all of that. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out at the Republican convention down at Utah Valley University on Saturday. If you remember last year, she almost got knocked out. It wasn't last year, it was 2024, but the last nominating convention she was at, she almost got knocked out of the race. She was challenged by Colby Jenkins, who got 57% of the vote at the state convention. She didn't collect signatures. He didn't collect signatures. And if she barely qualified for the primary by about 176 delegate votes. So she barely made it into the primary back in 2024. And then it was an extremely close primary. And I think she's going to have a really tough re-election battle, but she doesn't have to sweat the convention now. Whatever happens for her, she's already qualified for the primary through the signature gathering pass. So she doesn't have to worry about that, which is good for her. Now, in the other big congressional race that's probably going to be one of the headliners in June is the Congressional District 1 race. So far, Ben McAdams and Nate Blouin have already qualified for the primary ballot. I spoke with Liban Mohammed today. He told me that he's probably going to have enough certified signatures to get on the ballot as of tomorrow. So expect Liban Mohammed to make the ballot tomorrow. And then Michael Farrell, he is about 700 and some signatures away. So I would expect him to reach the primary ballot through the signature path. So instead of a two-way primary, now we've got a four-way primary. And don't forget, you've got Ava Lopez Chavez sitting out there. She could still get on the ballot through the signature path. She has about 4,600 verified signatures as of Tuesday evening. She needs to get 7,000 in order to qualify. So if she gets on the ballot there, that is all of a sudden 5 Democrats on the ballot. And, Stone Fanua is out there. He hasn't turned in any signatures. He's going to need to get, I think it's at least 40% at the state convention. So that's the technical 5-way, the technical 6-way primary, the potential 6-way primary. But I expect it's going to be at least a 4-way primary, if not a 5-way primary. And then what happens? Well, it's anybody's ball game at that point. We've got Ben McAdams running in the traditional lane. He's got a lot of name ID. People know who he is. He was elected to Congress before. He's got a massive cash advantage over all of the other candidates, which matters because it's essentially an 8-week sprint to the primary after the convention on Saturday. Primary is June 25th, so it's an 8-week sprint between now and then. And these other candidates are going to have to work really hard to get their name out there, and they don't really have the cash. Not even Nate Blouin has the cash. He's got about $200,000 in his bank, and McAdams has about $1 million on hand, or he has that much more than Blouin. So he's going to be able to outspend Blouin. And don't get me wrong, this is the election. Whoever wins this is most likely going to win in November. It's the same dynamic that the Republicans have been enjoying for the past couple of decades, where the only thing that matters is the primary election. And so I'm not saying the primary election is the only thing that matters in this race, but whoever wins is likely going to win in November. So you can expect McAdams to spend big. You can expect the other candidates. Watch and see what they do. You'll see other candidates. If I were Nate Blouin, the first thing I would do is I would try to challenge Ben McAdams to a bunch of debates. If I'm Ben McAdams, I don't do that. I say no, I ignore it, because right now you have to consider McAdams the frontrunner simply on name recognition. And name recognition is a huge part of this. So I would expect McAdams to decline those. Blouin will make a big deal out of it. And that's the dynamic. You're going to see Blouin trying to, and the other candidates as well, trying to get their name out there, make a big splash. And don't forget, it's not just Democrats who are going to be voting in this primary. I see someone in the comments. Sherry Vance says the progressive vote is split between the 3 progressive candidates. Well, unfortunately, the progressive vote is not enough to win this race, because the Democrats have an open primary. So it's not just Democrats who will be voting in this. It will be Democrats and independents if they request a ballot, and even Republicans if they request a ballot. They're able to vote in that. So yes, the progressive vote will be split between Nate Blouin and Liban Mohammed and Ava Chavez, but there's not enough of that vote. Even if there was just one of them in the race, there's not enough of that vote in this district to push them over the top. You have to build a larger coalition. And that's why I would say Ben McAdams is likely the front runner heading into this 8-week sprint. He's already in the primary. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. There was a comment, I'll get to this one in just a second, when we start talking about the blow up that hit Nate Blouin's campaign last week. But I still want to talk a little bit more about this congressional race right now and get your thoughts and your questions on what's going to happen in the primary. Let's see. Sherry Vance says, other than Blouin, McAdams, Mohammed, and Farrell, who are the 5th and 6th candidates, I already did that. Serald on YouTube says, Lyman, in my opinion, is more dangerous than Cox has been, but that difference is closing. Well, Lyman, this district is really sort of almost tailor drawn for him because it is in the Uinta Basin. It is in eastern Utah. Maloy loses a lot of districts, a lot of counties in western Utah that were in her old seat. Now it's all along the Canyonlands, up and through the Uinta Basin, and even into the Wasatch back. And I think it's really interesting that you'll see these voters, the voters in Park City and in Summit County, the lefty voters, they're going to be represented by one of these people. They're going to either be represented by Celeste Maloy or they're going to be represented by Phil Lyman. I don't know if they're going to vote in this primary or not, but one of those two is likely going to be their representative in Congress. And even though Phil Lyman has a massive cash disadvantage, don't think that he can't win this, because he's probably going to do very well at the convention. I would expect him to at least get 40%, if not win outright. He may get above the 60% and freeze out every other candidate in the race, because there are at least two other candidates who are running in that, the Republicans in that race. So in the 3rd district, you have Celeste Maloy, who's qualified for the primary. I expect Phil Lyman to do very well at convention. And then you also have Tyler Merced. David Harris suspended his campaign, so he's not going to be competing at the convention. But the one other person is Tyler Merced. So it is entirely possible that you will see Phil Lyman win the nomination at convention outright. But then again, it is an 8-week sprint to the finish line, and Maloy's got more money than he does. And don't underestimate what kind of an advantage that will be for her. Is it going to be enough? She is an incumbent, but a lot of these voters they know who she is, but they've never seen her on a ballot. And, if you get only the base voters, the base Republican voters coming out to vote in this primary, I expect Lyman to do very well. So I don't know how it's going to play out, but I expect this one to be tight as well as we head into the June primary. PMOT 36 on YouTube says, I question whether Blouin could win in a general election if he prevails in the primary. That's a good question. And don't underestimate, I would expect Riley Owen to be the Republican nominee. He's already qualified for the primary through signatures. Dave Robinson, I think he might be a little too toxic for everyone. If you don't remember who Dave Robinson is, he was the volunteer communications director for the Salt Lake County GOP, and then some Republican women accused him of inappropriate behavior towards them, misogynistic comments, harassment, things along those lines. It forced out Scott Miller, who was the Salt Lake County Republican Party chairman. He got forced out. It also cost Dave Robinson his position. And then after that, Dave Robinson basically sued everybody. He sued a bunch of elected officials. He sued a bunch of journalists. Most of those people have been dismissed from the case. There are still some people involved in this lawsuit, and they're still litigating it. But I don't know if I think he might be a little too toxic for voters. But Riley Owen, kind of an unknown. He's an activist. He's making some good connections among the Republican community. And, if you get Blouin, who has a reputation of being a bomb thrower, as we will talk about in a second, and it's not a recent thing with him. He likes to mix it up online, always has, as we've learned. But that could be a closer election than one would think as we head into November if Blouin does win the nomination. I'm not saying he won't win the nomination, but I'm saying that it might make it a little closer than you might expect because, and we've talked about this before, the 1st congressional district is not a Democratic district. Republicans still have a plurality there. The largest voting bloc in the district is registered Republicans at about 35%, and then you've got independents who are 33%, and Democrats make up about 23%. So it is still mostly Republicans, not by much, but it is. I do not know, and I know people are going to start typing, no, those are just Democrats who registered as Republicans in order to vote in the Republican primary. As we've talked about before, there is zero data to back that up. It's a story that people like to tell themselves that sounds good. Yeah, Democrats, there aren't enough of them to make a difference. Most of the people who changed their affiliation to vote to Republican were independents who went over to the Republican Party, not Democrats. There was not a large number of Democrats. So yes, you may know someone, you may even be someone who changed your affiliation to be a Republican to vote in the primary. That doesn't mean that there's a bunch of you because there's just no data, no actual voter registration data to back that up. When this big push happened in 2020, everybody looked at the voter registration data and the largest shift was independent voters moving to the Republican Party so they could vote in the primary election. So I know people are going to try and say that, but that's not the truth. That's not how this works. There's no data to back that up. Okay, so I guess we have to talk about it because this is one of the things that I think has already had a big impact in this race in the 1st congressional district. And I think it could be a big problem for Nate Blouin if he does win the nomination in June. Last week, Punch Bowl News reported that a bunch of old posts on message boards, like on skiing message boards, outdoor message boards, by Nate Blouin, attacked and mocked the LDS Church, made jokes about sexual assault, and even talked about one where Nate said that he had defecated in a church parking lot. I will give a little grace and say, this was something that was done 15 years ago, and everybody has said regrettable things in the past. But when I spoke to Reed Galen of the Lincoln Project, one of the founders of the Lincoln Project, or a strategist about this, and one of the groups that Nate Blouin is going to need to win this primary, if not the election in November, is that he's going to need Mormon voters and especially Mormon women. They're going to make up a large portion of the primary voters because in this district, about half of the voters in the new district are women and about 30% are members of the LDS Church. And that's just not overall. About 30% of the voters in this district are Mormon women who will be voting in this primary. And these comments they're kind of disqualifying for him among that group. Reed Galen said that that group is essentially gone to him. And that's incredibly damaging. And I think it also does not help Nate that Liban Mohammed looks like he is going to qualify. And I've talked to a lot of people who have said that they see Mohammed as an acceptable progressive alternative to Nate Blouin. And so I wonder how much they're going to split the votes there. Sherry Vance says he wasn't 13 years old. He was in his 20s. Yeah, he was in his 20s. I think one of the best comments I saw when this broke came from Liban Mohammed, who said when Nate Blouin made these comments, he was the same age that Liban is right now. It's a perfect example of you have to be incredibly careful about the things that you say online because they're going to come back and bite you in the butt eventually. My wife is a mental health professional and she says the internet is written in ink. Someone's going to find it somewhere. It is out there. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about though, while I was away, I was off on Thursday and Friday because I was down in Phoenix. But while I was down there, this whole thing blew up from Nate Blouin's supporters saying, oh, this is just an Oppo research hit. These posts were very hard to find, and these were probably given to the reporter by an Oppo research firm linked to McAdams. Maybe, I would even say probably. I don't know for sure. Nobody offered them to me, but that's what Oppo research does. And if it's out there, a good Oppo researcher is going to find it. In the past, as a reporter, I've been offered opposition research plenty of times. There have been times when I've looked at it and I said, no, I don't think that that's a story, and they hand it off to somebody else. But there have been times when, yes, I've been given Oppo research and it turned into a pretty good story. That's called sourcing. That's what a reporter does. And Ali Mutnick, who is the reporter with Punchbowl News, a very good reporter, I know her quite well. Good on her for having the kind of relationship that an Oppo research firm would offer this to her. And there's nothing unethical about a reporter doing it. There's nothing unethical about a reporter using this stuff. It was fully vetted. They went through and checked everything. They just didn't accept it sight unseen. But there's the blaming of McAdams for this is off base because that's just deflection. You're trying to get people mad at the wrong thing. It happened, and it's incredibly damaging. I mean, you just cannot underestimate how damaging this might be. There was a lot of contempt for the LDS Church in these posts, and maybe he's evolved, but he is very pugilistic online still. He does like to mix it up. And so I think this is incredibly damaging to him. I don't know what sort of impact it's going to have on the primary election, but I can say this for certainty. It certainly does not help. It certainly does not help him. So we can talk about all that stuff. I want to know what you think. Give me your thoughts in the comments on Instagram. Something from earlier. Someone said, people change. Have you not ever evolved to be a more enlightened person? Yes, people do change. But this is something that, Nate is going to have to grapple with now. And he is grappling with it. I don't know what the fallout is. I have heard that some of the progressive groups in Salt Lake County who endorsed him are now thinking about rescinding that endorsement, which, if you get a party, a progressive group within the Democratic Party, I don't know how much or how impactful their endorsement is, but I do know it's pretty impactful if an endorsement is rescinded for this reason. It just keeps this in the news cycle. It draws attention to it. And don't expect that this is over. I expect Blouin's opponents to continue to bring it up. I think it's going to be I think it's going to be referenced multiple times from the stage during the Democratic convention on Saturday at Jordan High School. I think, if I went on Call She, I would open up a prediction market. The number of times that this scandal is mentioned from the stage at Jordan High School, because it's not ain't going to be zero, folks. I expect every candidate to make mention of it either directly or obliquely on Saturday. This is a damaging thing, and this is politics. And you can be mad at the reporter, and you can blame McAdams for this, because deep in your heart, I think you know just how damaging it is. Gabriel on YouTube says, there's something to be said for this controversy with Blouin's old post for name recognition a la Graham Plattner. Plattner's, I Plattner seem, again, I'm not familiar with Maine. I believe it's Maine politics. I'm not intimately familiar with it, but Nazi tattoos do seem a lot worse. But again, these were pretty offensive posts about the LDS Church. And if these are the ones that they publish, other ones are floating around out there. There are more floating around out there. Hell, I've gone looking for them. I haven't found any really, but I'm still looking for them. If you know how to search, and it would be derelict by me as a journalist to not go looking for these things. And I have, and I still am. And we shall see. I mean, I spent months digging through old tweets from Trevor Lee when I outed him as behind that anonymous, racist, homophobic, transphobic Desnat account that he was running on Twitter. So, I would be lying if I said I haven't gone digging for more of these posts. I haven't found anything or anything worth publishing, and I'm sure that these were probably the worst of it, but there's got to be more out there. So I would expect that. Janice Baker Fair says, I'm an LDS woman who is a Democrat. For me, it's not what he said, but that it shows bad judgment. See, there's damaging. That is damaging. There's the damage that this caused to Nate Blouin's campaign. And the main thing is, what it does is it gives you a reason to not vote for him. That's the biggest damage that this does. It gives you a reason to look at the other candidates in the field. If you were going to vote for Nate Blouin and this pops up, just like Janice said, it gives you a reason not to vote for him, to not vote for him. And that's what I think the most damaging part of this is. Dirty Vespucci says, seems like you're pushing them. I'm just talking about the news, man. I'm just talking about these are out there. They're verified. These were posts by Nate Blouin, and people are going to continue to talk about them. And if he does win the primary, expect them to be weaponized in a congressional district that is 50% LDS. If you don't think that the Republican National Congressional Committee, that's the Republican political arm for House Republicans, if you don't think that these posts are going to show up in ads and mailers and online ads and in social media posts, welcome to Earth. I'm glad you're enjoying your first day on the planet, because that's what's going to happen. These will be weaponized against Blouin, especially in this district where Republicans are going to be desperate to try to hang on, especially after the Virginia redistricting plan looks like it has passed, and they're going to be redrawing their congressional maps and giving Democrats likely four more seats in the House. So that's where things sit. Sherry Vance on Facebook says, unfortunately, I worried that Liban Muhammad would be harmed in the general election by the religious bigotry and racism in Utah. It's heartbreaking. There's a great article today in Talking Points Memo, tpm.com. You should go over there and read it. It talks about how the Republican Party is going to make anti-Islam a major part of the 2026 campaign. Islamophobia is going to be a major part of it. And unfortunately, that's probably going to come Liban Muhammad's way if he does win the primary. And as I said off the top of the show, we're going to probably have at least a 4-way primary in that race, maybe a 5-way primary. And if we have a 4 or 5-way primary, someone's going to win it with 30%, maybe 35%. I doubt anybody's going to get a majority, but somebody's going to win it with 30% or just a little bit more than that, or somebody could win it with 30%. And, that's the same dynamic that has been in play for the Republicans. Because, when Blake Moore first won the nomination in the first congressional district in 2020, I think he was at like 35%, barely beat Bob Stevenson by just, I think, a couple hundred votes in that race. The only difference is those districts were overwhelmingly Republican. So it didn't matter if the Republican nominee had some toxic things in his background. As I said before, in the 1st Congressional District, Democrats are still the 3rd largest voting bloc in that district. It's Republicans, then Independents, then Democrats. It's not a Democratic majority district. So these posts, if Nate Blouin does win the primary, they will be weaponized against him. That's just how politics works. Old mentor of mine once said, politics is a contact sport. You got to be willing to throw some shoulders and some elbows from time to time. Let us talk a little bit about what happened in Davis County over the weekend. On Saturday, Trevor Lee failed to win the election at the Davis County Convention. He got only 45% of the vote. Bob Stevenson got 55% of the vote. And they both advanced to the June primary. Bob Stevenson had already qualified for the primary through signatures. And because Stevenson had gathered signatures under Davis County rules, because Trevor Lee did not gather signatures, he only needed 30% of the vote to advance, and he got 45. Now, when you use those percentages, it seems like it's a large number of votes, right? Nope, not at all. The actual tally was that Bob Stevenson got 51 votes and Trevor Lee got 40. 51 to 40. That was the vote. And if you actually look at this, it shows the outside influence that Republican delegates have on the race. Final tally was Stevenson 51, Trevor Lee 40 in terms of raw votes. And that translated to 55% to 45%. Now, in that district, in House District 16, there are about 10,500 registered Republicans. Delegates represented 0.86 of them, 0.86%. So less than 1%. Those delegates who voted in that race represented less than 1% of all the Republicans in that district. Now, I don't expect all 10,500 of them to vote in the upcoming primary, but it is interesting that Trevor Lee did lose that vote because the delegates are supposed to be his people. They are the most engaged. They are the most ideological Republicans in the district. And he was not able to lock down the activists there. He ended up losing. And to me, that says that there is a structural problem with his campaign. And like Nate Blouin, on the same day that the Nate Blouin messages broke, I think the one thing that really saved Nate Blouin from people in Utah really digging in on this story is later that afternoon, a website popped up where two former employers accused Trevor Lee of fraud. One of them was Moxie Pest Control. That was Jason Walton. He ran for U.S. Senate in 2024. He's the CEO of Moxie Pest Control. And they allege back in 2013 that Trevor Lee, when he was working for them, was double and triple depositing checks. And they had photographs of the checks on the website. It's called stoptrevorlee.com. And they showed these checks and it showed his signed confession. Now, this was never filed in the courts anywhere because I went looking for it. And when I finally talked to Jason Walton, I'm like, can I get a copy of that? And he said, I don't think so because it's in our safe. And I'm like, oh, so you never filed it. But it exists. It's out there. So that's the first allegation of fraud against Trevor Lee. The second came through a video interview posted to that website that's a little more recent. Trent Spafford, he is the founder and CEO of a water purification company called Enavive. And he made a couple of claims. One, that Trevor had stolen trade secrets from his company and took them to a competitor, was moonlighting for a competitor at the same time he was working for Enavive. And there was a lawsuit involved in this. That was dismissed last week or a couple of weeks ago by Mr. Spafford. When I asked him why he dropped the lawsuit, he said he didn't think he was going to get any settlement out of it. He told me the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. I don't know if there was a settlement or anything made to drop the lawsuit, but it was dropped. But in that lawsuit, he claimed that Trevor Lee owed him $93,000. What he said was that Lee was taking advances on his commission as a salesman for Innovive. There were something involving his home. He built a brand new house in HD 16. There's a couple of lawsuits out there where one of the contractors on the house was claiming they weren't getting paid, and they named Trevor Lee and his wife in the lawsuit. They were getting sued. They were eventually dismissed from the lawsuit because they weren't really the reason why this contractor wasn't getting paid. It was the housing builder, but that was holding up his house. And what Trent Spafford told me is that Lee was taking advances on his commission, and those advances kept piling up, and eventually it got to $93,000 is what he owed. And apparently Trevor Lee still owes him this $93,000. But the more startling accusation that came from Trent Spafford is this. He says that when, these arrears on these advances for his commission got to be $93,000, which is a lot of money, and they didn't see any way that Trevor was going to be able to pay it back, Trevor came up with this plan, allegedly, to use his position as a state lawmaker to help Innovive get a federal contract at Hill Air Force Base to clean up some water from the firefighting chemical that they used that had leached into the water. It was in the Sunset area. I've been reading up a little bit about that. And it was like anywhere between $500,000 and $650,000. And Lee said, I will help you get this contract. And if I do, then I would get commission off of it, and we can use that commission to retire my debt. Now, there's a recording of this. Trent Spafford provided me a copy of this recording. He recorded the meeting. He said there's a lot more recordings out there of his interactions with Representative Lee along these lines. And in that recording, you can hear Spafford lay out the whole plan, saying, you're going to help me get this contract, and then we're going to use that to help retire your arrears. And at one point, I transcribed it in the article, I wrote about it. But what he says in this recording is, if you want to continue a good relationship, we're able to get a 15 to 20% government contract, Spafford says. As we talked about, wiping the arrears away, that's the $93,000 that he owes, and that's a win for me so that you don't owe that to me. And then Spafford says, and then the possibility of still working with Alex, I hope that's a good relationship despite what might be happening here. Then you can hear Representative Lee reply, Alex will do what I say, and I've told him to move forward with you guys and everything. Now that Alex is Alex Tarbett, who is a lobbyist who was supposedly helping Lee secure the contract. I sent a copy of this recording that was given to me to a Republican member of the Utah legislature who was curious about what it said. When I sent it to them, their reaction was about the same thing that I thought. It sure as hell sounds like a quid pro quo. This is an alarming allegation. This is, if true, and again, this is all alleged, but if true, this is quite a bit of corruption. Now, Representative Lee is saying it is a disgruntled employer who tried to sue him and didn't get any money from him. Don't forget that Spafford says Lee still owes him $93,000. But if you listen to this recording, and I was going to play it here tonight, but I wasn't able to get permission from Mr. Spafford to play it on the live stream, so I held off. I don't want to breach anything and cause any problems. But there's a reason why House Speaker Mike Schultz asked the Attorney General to investigate this. Because when you listen to this recording, it's pretty alarming. And the allegations that are being made by this Trent Spafford about Representative Lee using his position to personally benefit, to pay off a $93,000 debt that he owes. These are some pretty shocking allegations. And that's why there is now an independent investigation into what happened here with that. One of the funny parts was Representative Lee, after going quiet, I texted with him a couple of times. I asked him for a comment. He used his favorite schoolyard taunt, calling me a mommy blogger. I just replied, that's not what I'm asking. And you've said that before, but here's what I want to know. He wouldn't reply to me. But then he did post on social media that the only thing he's really addressing is the check fraud. There is a signed confession out there. That's the only thing he's addressing right now. And he's saying that it was done when he was younger, when he was a college student. He was early 20s, probably in college. I don't know. And that he has since gotten married and fathered 5 children. The funny part about that explanation is Trevor Lee was already married at the time. He was married to his first wife at the time. One of the things that Jason Walton told me when we spoke about this is that when they were going to fire Trevor over this fraud, and he also said that he regrets not getting the police involved, but he thought he was cutting a young guy a break, that he made Trevor bring his wife into the office so that he could explain to her why he was being fired. Because according to Walton, Representative Lee had just married her like 6 months beforehand. Apparently, I'm told, I haven't confirmed this, and I will say that I have been in contact with his ex-wife. She doesn't really want to talk much about her time with Representative Lee, and I respect that, so I won't be talking much about our conversations. I've been told that he convinced her to forego an LDS mission to get married to him. And then they were living here in Utah, and then they moved out to, I believe, North Carolina. I've been told, and then eventually their marriage ended for a number of reasons. And I'm not going to go into that. That's not my story to tell. But I can say that it was probably more than just this incident of check fraud. Funnily enough, funnily, is that a word? I don't know if that's a word, but humorously enough, I'll say it that way, I was actually chasing this story back in 2022. And this is after I had reported about Representative Lee's anonymous burner Twitter account that he used to make racist jokes and transphobic jokes and homophobic posts and attack liberals and Democrats and hiding behind the cloak of anonymity. After I had reported that, somebody reached out to me and said that they knew Trevor and told me this story about that he got fired for check fraud, for depositing checks twice. How did this guy know about it? He said that Trevor bragged to him about it, bragged to him that he got away with it, bragged to him that Representative Lee almost gleefully told him this story. That's when I started to look into it. I actually reached out to the pest company in North Carolina. I never heard anything back. In the video, the gentleman says that the media reached out to him. That was me. He claims he tried to call back, but he never got in touch with me. It was water under the bridge. But I've been trying to come back to this story a couple of times over the past few years. And then all of a sudden there it was on Wednesday, right in my face. All the stuff that I'd been looking for. So I felt a little bit vindicated because I had actually asked Trevor Lee about this. I think a couple of times in interviews. I was interviewing him. He was making some claim that there were furries up in the Davis County school district that were using litter boxes. Remember that golden oldie? Yeah, he swore up and down that was happening in his daughter's school. And he sent me a bunch of pictures. It was kids in Halloween costumes, but he was swearing up and down. And I figured I would shoot my shot. And I said, well, what can you tell me about this, why you were let go from this pest control company in North Carolina about a decade ago? And it caught him off guard. I can tell I caught him off guard, but he wouldn't comment on it. He said he didn't know anything about it. If he ends up losing the primary, it will not be the main reason he ends up losing the primary. It will be a reason he ends up losing the primary. But again, it is the same thing as Nate Blouin's old posts. It is another reason to give voters not to vote for you. It just gives voters another reason not to vote for you. And that's why things like this are so effective, especially when they drop at this time. It's not a hit job. This was not part of the Bob Stevenson campaign. Stevenson didn't have anything to do with it. I know that for sure. I have an idea of who was behind it. I can't say for sure, but this did not have the hallmarks of a Bob Stevenson joint, if you want to talk about using the Spike Lee word. So anyway, I've talked enough about that. I do want to ask your opinion about this. I'm hoping to go to the Republican convention down at Utah Valley University. I've applied for a press pass. I hope they'll give me one. I don't know if they will. Maybe. But if they do, I've got a couple of pins that I'm going to wear. I want to wear one of them, and I want to get your thoughts. So you can tell me in the comments which one you like better. There's this first one here. Hold it up to the camera. I don't know if you can see that, but it says, "Let's cosplay masculinity," and it's got kind of the Punisher logo. Because if you see anybody who's wearing the Punisher logo, people who wear the Punisher logo, unironically, have never read the comic. They don't know what that's about. So that's the first one. And I like that one a lot. But I think this is the one that I might end up wearing because it's kind of sneaky. You gotta get up really close to understand what it is. But this is the other one. This one is, it says, let me get that in focus there. It looks like the Gadsden flag, but it's got a snake that's kind of goofy, and it says, "No one's treading on you, sweetie." I think that might be the winner, but I want to hear your thoughts about that. Which one do you like better? Which one do you think I should wear to the Republican convention? And which one do you think is less likely to get me beat up? Because I'll be rolling into an environment with a bunch of very sensitive snowflakes. Serald66 on YouTube says the first one reminds me of Tim Burton. I love that too. I do love that about it. But again, and you have these dorks who think that they're tough wearing the Punisher logo. They've never read the comics. They've never read it. Congressional District 4. I don't know who's going to get the nomination in either party. I would expect Mike Kennedy in the Republican Party. I don't know who's going to get it in the Democratic, but that is an incredibly Republican district. I think it's like D plus 22 to 25. It is the most Republican district in the state now under the Cook PVI. Oh, I stand corrected. It's actually the second most. The Cook PVI is an R plus 17. I think for the Republicans to be threatened there, you're going to need a huge Democratic wave nationally, like a big one, like a 20-point national wave. Right now, we're seeing a Democratic overperformance in these special elections by around 17 points. That one's going to be a real hard one for a Democrat to win, which is what I'm assuming you're asking about. I think that is, there's a reason why the Cook Political Report rates it as safe Republican. They actually rate District 2, District 3, and District 4 as safe Republican. Again, Mike Kennedy has not appeared on the ballot for most of the voters in that district, but he is an incumbent of sorts. I expect him to do very well at the convention. He did not gather signatures. Vote for Stephen Burt. Of course, he's right there. Independent, running in that district as well. He chimes in on Instagram. Again, if you just look at the numbers, Cook PVI is R plus 17. Stephen Burt says the data is clear. It's a better chance of beating Kennedy with an independent than with a Democrat. Again, full disclosure, Stephen Burt is an independent running for that seat, but he's probably right. Again, what you saw in 2022 when the Democrats cleared the field for Evan McMullin, that was the closest statewide race we've had in several decades. And there was a moment about 3 weeks before the end of the race where Even Mike Lee's people were convinced that Evan McMullin was going to win that race. So Stephen Burt's got a point. I don't know if those same dynamics are going to play out this time, because you will have at least one Democrat in the race. Plus, you're going to have the Libertarian, Taylor Wright. And I don't know who the Republicans are coming out of convention. I would expect Mike Kennedy to be one of them, and he may win the whole thing. But I really haven't talked with the other candidates. I don't know a lot about the other candidates, so I don't know what's going to happen in that district. Katie Did It 124 on YouTube says, the hit job on Judge Hagen. Could you address this story? Why are they doing this, and what are they hoping to gain? If you're unfamiliar with this, and this broke while I was out of town, and KSL was the first one to report this, and they did a very good job. They reported that there was a complaint filed against Supreme Court Justice Diana Hagen, in which Hagen's ex-husband filed a complaint and said that the justice had exchanged inappropriate text messages with David Ryman, who was one of the lawyers for the group suing in the redistricting case, the group suing the state. The Judicial Conduct Commission investigated and said that, there was nothing. They called the allegations, there wasn't enough to investigate. But the House Speaker and Senate President, House Speaker Mike Schultz, Senate President Stuart Adams, said that there are some questions that remain unresolved, and so they're doing an independent investigation. I don't know enough about the allegations. I've not seen the report itself. According to the KSL reporting, they're saying that the justice began having an inappropriate relationship with Ryman, one of the attorneys representing the plaintiffs in the redistricting case. They said that the text messages might have been suggestive. I believe Hagen recused herself from the case when it came before the Supreme Court last year, in which they said that the legislature had overstepped its constitutional authority when it repealed Prop 4. I believe that she had recused herself from that. But anyway, this is the legislature is getting involved. They're dredging this back up, and they want to make this a major part of their campaign heading into November. Because don't forget, they're going to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that says that the legislature can repeal a citizen-passed initiative. That will be alongside one that says you need at least 60% to approve a ballot initiative that raises taxes. And the way that one's written is it's so vague that anything that costs money could be construed as raising taxes. So it would be a de facto, you would need 60% to pass any ballot initiative. And so they're going to use this as a campaign issue. House Speaker Mike Schultz, when he spoke at the Davis County Convention, he lit into the judiciary, claiming that there's no accountability for the judiciary. There's no oversight for the judiciary. Well, there is, but there's also the separation of powers. But the legislature got ruled against a couple of times, and they're very mad about that. And so they have been on the warpath against the judiciary, and this is part of it. I can't comment on the seriousness of these text messages or these allegations. I don't know what role that they played. I truly hope the investigation is independent. There was some reporting this week that the legislature may have broken the law by revealing this information, because those records, and it was a preliminary investigative report, those records should not have been, or I'll put it this way, ought not have been made public in the first place. There's an argument to be made for that. And I find that ironic when you've got a legislature who has done everything they can to keep themselves from being held accountable about anything. They release these. Good point by Stephen Bird. He says, that's correct. Hagen recused herself, and this matter has already been evaluated by the Judicial Conduct Commission, which includes members of the legislature, including Brady Brammer. Yes, exactly. But this is going to be election year fodder. It's going to be what they use to whip up the base. much like the National Republican Party, and I mentioned this article earlier in Talking Points Memo, you should go read it, but much like the National Republican Party is trying to make the 2026 midterms about Islamophobia, the Republican Party here in Utah wants to make the 2026 midterms about going against the judiciary. Gabriel says, no oversight of the judiciary. Didn't they censor a judge during the session? Yes, they did censure a judge, and that was appropriate. The judge had made some very inappropriate comments from the bench. I thought that censure was appropriate, although it is kind of ironic when they were basically forced to take action against the member of the state school board, Natalie Klein, after she implied that a female athlete was transgender and she had to have police protection because of the hate that was directed her way by this social media report from Natalie Klein. And they did end up censuring her, didn't make too big of a deal out of it. But they did not want to do anything with that at all because that's what their base liked. So I find that ironic that they did that. Rosemary Lesser. Oh, former Representative Rosemary Lesser is running in House District 10, says Schultz has been after the judiciary for years. I agree with that. By the way, if you are a paying subscriber to Utah Political Watch, you will see that HD10 is one of those races that, according to my race ratings, is going to be extremely competitive this year. And you can become a paying subscriber at utahpolitics.news. Look at all of my race ratings for the House, for the Senate, the 15 Senate races, the 75 House races. I break them all down, tell you which ones are worth paying attention to. And I'm doing something really fun. I'm going to publish this probably next week. I'm going to look at what it might look like with the legislature if a Democratic wave, like the one that looks like it's shaping up in November, hits Utah. What would happen with legislative races if we got a D+10 wave in November? I'll be publishing that story next week, but it will be only for subscribers at utahpolitics.news. So that's a little bit of a tease right there. Back to the Trevor Lee story for a moment. One of the biggest things that happened in that race on Saturday, when he only got 45% of the vote, according to Davis County GOP rules, if you are a non-signature gathering candidate, and I think this is appropriate because Republicans have been struggling for a way to make the caucus and convention to prioritize it. And I think Davis has a good idea here. What they say is if you are a non-signature gathering candidate and you get 50% of the vote or more at convention, then you are what they call the, quote, party endorsed candidate. And that means that the party will endorse you and they'll give you financial resources in your primary campaign against a signature gathering candidate. I think that's appropriate. I think that that's a really good way to incentivize this sort of thing. Trevor Lee only got 45% this time, so he is not the party endorsed candidate, and they cannot give him money. In 2024, when he went to a primary against Daniela Harding, the Davis County GOP gave him $10,000 for that race. That money's not available to him this time. And remember, he only won that primary by about 500 votes. Trevor Lee is incredibly vulnerable, and Bob Stevenson is not an insurgent candidate. He's been in office for years. Don't forget that when he was first elected to the Davis County Commission, he beat Tammy Tran, who was a really tough opponent. He beat her in that race to get on the Davis County Commission 8 years ago. I would not take him lightly if I were Trevor Lee in that, and losing the financial support of the party is significant. I was looking at the disclosures, and he recently donated his own campaign $10,000. So pay attention to that. That is important. One other thing that happened in the primary that I wanted to talk about real quick is in House District 39. That is Ken Ivory's race. And he caught a break. He caught a huge break because Lisa Dean, who had collected signatures in 2024 and forced Ivory into a primary, and she only lost that race by 590 votes to Ivory. She was back and she was collecting signatures again, and she fell 3 signatures short. She needed 1,000. She only got 997, which is agonizingly close. And that means she had to rely on the delegates, and Ivory overwhelmingly won the delegate vote on Saturday in House District 39. You want to know how many delegates actually voted in that race? 45. Ivory got 35 of them. And so that means that Ivory is the nominee. He doesn't have to go through a primary at all because he got 35 out of 45 votes. Oh, and by the way, those 45 delegates who voted in that equal just about 0.55% of all the registered Republicans in the district. So when you hear people talk about the outsized influence of Republican delegates, that's what I'm talking about. 35 delegates were the reason, I'll put it this way, 3 signatures and 35 delegates were the difference between Ken Ivory having to go into a primary or not. Now, I think the 2 Democrats who are running in that race, well, actually, there's one, it's Drew Howells, who is the Democratic nominee. I thought there was more than one, but he won the Democratic nomination outright. And Drew Howells seems like a good candidate. And that is a kind of race where, if we get a bit of a Democratic wave, Ivory could be in trouble. You can look at my race ratings for a bigger breakdown. I'll pull that one up here. I'm not gonna show it to you, but I'll tell you what it says real quick. But HD 39 is one of those races that could be competitive. I've got it rated as lean Republican. That's based on the partisan vote totals in that district across 8 elections. I've got it rated as lean Republican, but I've also created a rating system called the Utah Competitiveness Index. And what the Utah Competitiveness Index does is it compares a district to the statewide Republican baseline of 64.5%. And under the Utah Competitiveness District, that's a toss-up. The Utah Competitiveness Index says HD 39 is a toss-up that actually leans Democratic. That district votes more Democratic than the state baseline. So that's one to pay attention to in November. Ivory catches a break that he doesn't have to use resources and energy in a primary that he very well could have lost for the want of 3 signatures. France Barrel on Instagram says 45 delegates decide book banning. Understanding caucus is really worth a story. It really is. If you just look at the number of caucus members compared against the makeup of a district, it's really eye-opening. It's really eye-opening. Rosemary Lesser says Drew is an Air Force veteran. Yeah, I spoke to him a little bit at the Salt Lake County Democratic Convention. We'll have to see how it plays out, though. But that is a district that could be very, very competitive in the fall. Jaden Weeks on Facebook says, do we know much about Susan Lee running for county commissioner? I believe she won her primary, but want us to wonder if the apple falls far from the tree. Susan Lee, who's running for Davis County Commission, is Trevor Lee's mom. And to say that they are politically aligned would be a bit of an understatement. They are like 2 peas in a pod politically. Gabriel on YouTube says, any update on Senator Dan McKay's race? That one's going to be, the nomination or primary is going to be decided at convention on Saturday. All 3 of the Republicans in that race, this is Senate District 18, you've got Dan McKay, the incumbent. You've got Doug Fiafia, who is he was elected to the Utah House of Representatives first in 2024. He's got a lot of tech companies behind him. He's getting some big support. And then you've also got Tracy Halverson. And if you remember Tracy Halverson, she was behind that giant lawsuit that tried to get Spencer Cox and Deidre Henderson and Derek Brown and John Curtis kicked out of office and replaced with the convention winners because they're claiming that SB 54 and the signature path is a racketeering scheme and that it's an insane lawsuit that was thrown out of court. But she's running for that. She also ended up getting banned from attending any Republican Party events for the next, I think, 6 years, and she can't be elected to any positions in the Republican Party. The loophole is that she's running for office here, so she can be at the convention, but she's going to be on the ballot and at the convention running this. So those are the three Republicans running in that district. The Democrat who's already wrapped it up is A. Dane Anderson, but that will be decided at the state convention because it is a multi-county race. So anyway, let me see if there's anything else on my list that I wanted to talk about. No, I think I've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about tonight. I don't know if anybody else has any final questions, any final comments, but as always, I am so grateful and thankful and appreciative of your time and your attention. You tune into my little show and we talk about what's happening in Utah politics. I like a chance to sort of suss out what is happening and sort of look ahead. I'm hoping again to be at the Republican Party convention. I applied for a press pass. They're supposed to let us know by the 23rd. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I don't know. And unlike the legislature, who again I am suing to get a press pass, this is a private organization, so they're completely justified if they don't want to give me a press pass. I hope that they do. If they don't, I'm going to. I'm not going to be quiet about it. Not much I can do about it. A couple of years ago, they passed a rule that said the media couldn't come to their state central committee meetings. That rule was because of me. I was the only reporter who would go to their state central committee meetings. I love going to those things. I always get a great story out of something that happened there, but they just decided they weren't going to let the media in anymore. And when I spoke to Rob Axon about that, I'm like, one, I don't blame you. I can see why you're doing it. I hate it for me, but I understand why you're doing it because, you don't want, usually something kind of embarrassing happens at that meeting. I remember one year, and this is probably the main reason why they ended up voting to exclude me. I was at the meeting and I was sitting in the back of the room and I was live tweeting it as I did, or live posting on social media at the time. And I was making a few jokes and sort of making fun of some of the things that were happening in the meeting. And Chris Null, who's running for Salt Lake County Council, twice during that meeting tried to get me kicked out because of what I was saying on social media about the meeting. He was very, very, very sensitive about what little me was saying online. And he tried to get me kicked out twice. Well, now I'm not allowed, media is not allowed to go to those meetings because of me. Funny follow-up story. Last year, 2025, I went to the Salt Lake County Republican Convention, sitting in the back. Chris Null was the outgoing chair of the convention. I'm sitting in the back of the room, and somebody at the convention texted me and said, "Heads up, Chris Null has asked us to monitor your social media feed during the convention." They were so concerned about the things that I was saying on social media about them because it hurt their tender feelings. It hurt their tender fifis, and so they were watching what I was saying about them and wanted to throw me out. It's the classic dish it out but can't take it. Okay, well, I think that that's going to do it for me this evening. I will put out, this is my plea to support what I do. I am an independent journalist. I do not have corporate owners. Utah Political Watch is owned and operated by me and my wife a little bit, but not much. And that's it. I don't have corporations telling me what I can cover and what I can't cover, what I can write and what I cannot write. I don't have billionaires doing that. They're not scratching me big checks. If there's a billionaire who wants to scratch me a big check, that's fine, but I'm not going to play your game. I'll take your money, but I'll continue doing what I'm doing. But no one's doing that. I rely on you. I rely on the people who consume my product. And I appreciate that because that means I'm accountable to you. I'm not accountable to big corporations. I'm not accountable to billionaires, to political interests. I'm not, and that means that, what the kind of coverage that you're getting is not beholden to access. There's journalists who are access journalists. They get access to these political figures because they're trusted that they're going to write the kind of story that they want. But that freedom that freedom comes with a lot of pressure on me because, I still have to pay the bills. This is my full-time job, and I intend to keep doing it as long as I can. And that means that I need your help. And you can go to my website, utahpolitics.news. You can sign up for my newsletter. Most of my journalism is free. You'll just get it in the email. You'll just get it in your email. But if you feel like it, you can subscribe. It's like $5 a month, $55 a year. That's 17 cents a day, I think, or something along those lines. And that gets you a full year of coverage. You also get access to my race ratings, and you get a few other things that regular people don't. You'll get some subscriber-only articles and such. Or if you don't want a subscription, and I understand not everybody wants a subscription, there's a tip jar there, and you can throw a couple of dollars in that as well. All of it supports what I do. All of it supports this journalism. And I'm so thankful that I get to do this. I'm so thankful that I have a platform, that I have an audience, that I have people who want to read what I have to write, want to listen to what I have to say, who have questions for me, who trust me to tell them the kind of stories that they're looking for. For example, there is a glowing profile in the Deseret News tonight of Kai Schwemmer, who is running to be for the vacant office as Republican Party treasurer. Chris Null, who's the current treasurer, is running for county council, so that he stepped down from that. Kai Schwemmer is the political director for the College Republicans of America. What you need to know about Kai Schwemmer is that he's a groyper. What is a groyper? Well, they are a follower, they are a supporter of Nick Fuentes, who is a Christian nationalist, who is a white supremacist. And Kai Schwemmer, he has an invite-only show on Nick Fuentes' exclusive streaming service. You have to be invited to do that. So he aligns with Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes is, as I said, a Christian nationalist. He is a white supremacist. Extreme, extreme, extreme. But there is a glowing profile of Kai Schwemmer in the Deseret News tonight. If you want that kind of thing, it's out there for you. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do a glowing profile of someone who is an admitted groyper. I think that you tell their story and you explain to people what that means. And that's what I believe in. So if that's the kind of thing that you like, you go to my website, utahpolitics.news, sign up or subscribe. But again, thank you so much for your time and your attention and your eyeballs. Everybody stay safe, and we will talk to you again soon. Have a great evening, everybody. Love y'all.